Good morning and welcome to the third EPRC webinar of the autumn series. My name is Ruth Downs and I'm a research associate at EPRC. This morning's webinar presents the process and outcome of a participatory workshop programme which explored innovation strategies for system-level transformation. This workshop programme was financed by the Scottish University's Insight programme and was led by a joint team from the School of Innovation and Technology at the Glasgow School of Art, EPRC, and international partners from Sweden and the Basque Country. This morning, Madeline Smith and Michael Johnson from the School of Innovation and Technology will present the work before we open up the floor for questions and discussion. If you would like to make an intervention later, you can either use the Zoom hand raise function or feel free to put questions into the chat during the presentation and we can pick them up later as part of the Q&A. The seminar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards on the EPRC YouTube channel. We'll also share a link by email with you. And so if you have colleagues who would subsequently be interested, they will be able to pick it up afterwards. I'm delighted to introduce Madeline and Michael this morning. Madeline specialises in strategy and evaluation for clusters, innovation and complex collaborations, supporting programmes to increase the innovative capacity of businesses, public sector organisations and communities. Michael is an Innovation Leadership Fellow in Creative Economy with experience in applying design-led mapping and modelling methods to support regional, sectoral and sustainable development. So with no further delay, I'll hand over to Michael and Madeline for the presentation now.
Good morning, very pleased to be here. I'm going to try and share my slides, so do bear with me whilst the system warms up. Hopefully it will come on fairly quickly. Can you give me the heads up when you get the view that you can actually see? That's all good. It now needs to wake up a little because it hasn't yet had enough coffee before I can move them on. But anyway, just generally very, very happy to be here sharing the process and the outputs from the programme that we did collaboratively with EPRC and funded by Scottish University's Insights Institute, which really helps collaborations between different universities on areas of interest for Scotland and internationally, so that we were looking for a challenge area where we could work together to say, how could we bring the capability that we different institutions are bringing to bear on a particular area. I'm still struggling to move my slides, but yeah, here we go. So really this morning, the key question we were looking at was looking at innovation policies. How can we use innovation policies to be more than incremental innovation, but to really drive regional transformation? Sorry. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the drivers for the programme, why we were doing it, who was involved, both in Scotland and international partners, how we used inputs of good examples and good practice to help stimulate our thinking, what the process we went through of a participatory design-led workshop system to really try and draw together all the experience that we had in the room, and then what we learned, what we developed as our outputs, and how we might use this, what our ambitions are for next stages. So I suppose why are we wanting to use innovation policy in a different way? In the past, we have maybe looked at innovation policy to try and improve the innovation capability of businesses with a very, very economic focus, potentially driving the competitiveness of a region if you looked at it in a cumulative form. But actually, the economic development policy landscape has shifted, and we're now much more aligned towards more strategic policy agendas. We're looking at mission-oriented policies around net zero or around health and well-being. It's really driving that change to a new industrial policy. Some of the areas that you start seeing are around transformative innovation policy, real ambition for these innovation policies to change and shift what's happening in a region. So it's building on the capability that many regions pulled together around smart specialization strategies to try and say, how can innovation policy build on this collective, collaborative capability to transform the region? And as I say, it's responding to some of those very, very tricky issues, which can only be addressed through those system level collaborations around climate, around demographic shifts, around geopolitical volatility. And many of them are focused and on the sustainable development goals as an area where how can we all collaborate together to try and shift our performance against those sustainable development goals. And so I suppose our key question was, how can we ensure that the innovation policy fits this transformative agenda? And it was very much when we were looking at this in Scotland because of some drivers around a new innovation policy at a Scottish level. And when we talked to international partners, we found that other regions and countries were also trying to look at this transformative agenda. And so that's why we tried to build this collaboration to explore this challenge. So as I say, it was looking at that change at a system level. We have recently had Scotland's National Innovation Strategy published, trying to look at how can we improve our performance across Scotland, looking not only at economic, but also social and environmental performance. But what are those key challenges then, if you're wanting to achieve transformation through these innovation policies? So we talked with a whole range of partners and stakeholders internationally and in Scotland to say, what are the areas which are difficult when you're looking at trying to implement some of these transformative innovation policies? And what we got back, what the areas that stakeholders were saying were challenges, first of all, is actually, how do we design it? How do we really know what it is we need to do to be able to shift the needle, to be able to look at transformative agendas? Do we know really how to design a program to be able to make the difference? The second one is real mobilization. It's how do we build the collaborations? These can't be done in small incremental areas. You need to be pulling together significant collaborations. So how do we engage the right people? How do we start that process to be able to mobilize the collaboration we need? Third one is always challenges about implementation. What's the best vehicle for us to deliver this kind of transformative agenda? And the final one is always a challenge in collaborative innovation and transformation at a system level. How can we evidence the success? How can we show that what we're doing is actually bringing about the change, and therefore show, but also learn if we're not bringing about the change, can we evaluate and learn and therefore potentially shift our policy if we need to? So evidencing success, but also evaluating performance around impact is a really important and challenging area. So we decided to focus on those 4 areas as a model, as a frame for us to start to explore this question. And we had partners from across the triple helix, certainly within Scotland, but also international partners as well, in particular from Sweden, from the Basque Country and from Denmark, we were building on collaborations that we already had, and so had been able to involve these partners in some of those earlier explorations. But we had, across the triple helix, we had local and national government, we had the enterprise agencies, research funding councils. We also had quite a few innovation delivery partners. And what I mean by that are intermediary organizations, very often cluster organizations or innovation centers that were bringing together collaborations to be able to deliver change. So some of those innovation delivery partners are really key in being able to implement some of the policy agendas. And we also had some private sector and some experts in innovation and strategy who work to try and help and support these organizations and support government in their evaluation or their strategy development for their policies. One of the things that was also beneficial is that we managed to align with an Interreg program that was just kicking off It came from one of the examples with our stakeholders that EPRC had been involved in and had developed into an Interreg program called Commit, which was very much about this mission-driven agenda about going towards net zero. And so we involved some of our Commit partners, invited them along to one of our workshops to be able to get their experience and their input into developing the outputs that we finally generated. One of the things with this is that we can be very insular in our thinking, so which is why it's great to be able to involve international partners. But we also decided to stimulate some of our thinking with some speakers on innovation policy. We had James Wilson who from the Basque Country to help us think about why innovation policy is changing right at the beginning and what are some of the drivers. And in our final program workshop, we invited Peter Vosner from the Institute of Macroanalysis and Development from Ljubljana, who really has done a lot of work around how innovation policies are being implemented and what's the learning across Europe that we can take from that. And also Alistair MacLeod, who was one of the team that in Scottish Government, who is looking to how we move the innovation policy from just that policy agenda to actually implementation. What do we actually need to do on the ground to try and implement some of these policy agendas? We also had an international panel to help us explore some of the innovation questions that we've been generated. And a very important aspect of our whole process is that we invited case studies right at the beginning of good examples, good learning. They may not have been perfect all the way through, but what have people been doing in this innovation policy agenda? Could we see some good practice case studies from across our partners? And so that acted as a real stimulus to all of our workshops, these examples of this is what we did and this is what we've learned. Talking a bit more about those case studies, we wanted to explore that journey of an innovation policy from design. What is it that we need to do within these complex system environments? To mobilization, can we get the right stakeholders and partners engaged? Actually, implementation, sometimes we need to implement it in a different way. What's the delivery learning that we can draw from some of these cases? And also, how do we demonstrate the impact, showing that long-term change? Because that is also a really good way of investing, of justifying further investment into some of these long-term changes. I'm going to bring my my partner in crime, Michael, in to talk a little bit more about the case studies and then how we used them to actually stimulate the workshop process to generate some really valuable learning.
Great. Thanks very much, Madeline. And forgive me, I'm going to have to say the words next slide, please, occasionally going forward. Not just yet here, but that might be a little repeated term now. So yeah, because those were brought up as the challenges, design, mobilization, implementation, evidencing success, we decided to use that as a way of storytelling these complex case studies to really gain insight and comparability across different contexts, different regions, different areas of innovation policy. And we found that you'll see in the background of some of these slides, these posters that became a really key output for people to access these really complex areas. And it wasn't just good practices that we captured in there and the stories of what they did, but the challenges they were very honest in sharing a lot of that. And that really set the tone for some of the discussions we'd have through the workshops. So next slide, please. And representing some of that design-led process, we often when I'm engaging these more complex sort of scenarios for design engagement, it's finding these frameworks, these ways of storytelling, this way of designing discourse so that everyone can access it, but still meaningfully engage with the complex scenarios or situations that are involved. So one of the frameworks we use to help our partners, our collaborators, to tell their stories was what we call the 5 Ps. So almost at each stage, at the design stage, mobilize stage, deliver stage, evidence stage, what was the purpose of why you were doing this? Who were the people involved? What practices, what were you doing? how did you know you were progressing, or what were the ambitions towards outcomes, and those problems or possibilities that emerged as well. So we got a really rich range of information and stories. And here is a little indicator of just how much we were able to capture and share. And I'll give a bit more detail about how we used that in the workshops over the next slides. So next slide, please.
Just before you go on, Michael, I think it's we were drawing examples from so many different sectors, from so many different regions, tackling different innovation challenges, that having something like the 5P model helped us have a consistent frame to be able to draw common learning. And I think that proved quite valuable, because it allowed some conversations to happen about, oh, well, you did this and we did that, and this is my experience as well. So as Michael says, it helped draw out the lessons from a very complex and diverse set of examples.
Yeah. And even as a method for us to access these very complex stories that are other people's contexts, it helps us have that common framework to interpret and best facilitate the dialogues that we wanted to have as well. So for those leading that kind of process, these frameworks work both ways, both in communication and for us in interpretation. So in terms of the process, there were 3 participatory design-led workshops that happened in person within Glasgow and online. So those international stakeholders were very much able to engage. And particularly with the 3rd workshop, we had quite a few international partners who were able to visit and be in person to really share and make sense of the learnings that emerged and to form recommendations. And you'll see that we kind of zoomed in on a couple of those areas from the case studies from the policy design and mobilizing stakeholders in workshop 1, implementation evidencing success in workshop 2, and then workshop 3, we were able to sort of see what emerged from that. Can we validate those, and what should we do about it as well? So next slide, please. So because we produced those case studies, we wanted to find ways to use them and engage with them. And thankfully, we managed to get the partners to present about their case studies at each of these distinct workshops. So for example, with policy design, we looked at one that was, one of the speakers was from Connecting Nature, that framing on the value of nature, why it is an important part of place development with Glasgow City Council was one of the examples that they shared. And with mobilizing stakeholders, one of the EPRC case studies was the Net Zero Industrial Cluster Exchange, really looking at the circular economy in relation to industry at a regional level, and that there was a European network that they were forming through this program. So that mobilizing of stakeholders was a really important story for them to tell. With the 2nd workshop, implementation, one of the innovation centres in Scotland was the transformation of the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre to the built environment smarter transformation. So they really wanted to tell that story of why did they change, why was that important part of their delivery, and how that informed their better relationships with construction and innovation in that sector. And then evidencing success, BEST were actually part of a wider program of innovation centres, which itself wanted to understand, are these doing the job? How do we know the difference they're making? So the Scottish Funding Council very generously shared their process, the methods of evaluation, the types of questions and evidence they were gathering, and the challenges with that as well to help tell that story. So really relevant, really rich and really valuable case studies that are still there online to read and share. So we really recommend, if you haven't engaged with those outputs, then we'll share a link to the website that you can access them as well. Next slide, please. And the way we use them to get everyone in the room talking, responding to the topics that came up or how they could respond was some, again, very simple frameworks to share and discuss around. And we found, I have to say, these were really, really effective to offer clear responses and inputs. So what was essential to making innovation policy a success, or what do people from their experience believe is essential to help make it a success? What are the pitfalls? What are the things that can wrong or that you need to avoid? And learnings, things to improve on next time. But particularly desirable for us was what's transformational, what's not just going to help get it done, but actually is going to help you achieve that transformation you need. And this was where there were some real strong opinions and strong debates and discussions about what actually makes a difference. And you'll see in the next slide, I believe, the ways we sort of processed that and collected it together. So in person, very traditional sort of discursive format. You see at the top that prompt from one of the case studies, zooming in on that part of the challenge and the area. and just breaking that down. And we were able to collect a lot of rich discussion, a lot of building on the key points, experiences that people in the room were having, and everyone was really able to engage at that level, because I think at that policymaker level, they've got a lot to say about how challenging it is. But we saw the way we designed the method, it worked online as well. Madeline particularly was able to facilitate those remotely in the room to collect at an even keel. I think we got just as much rich data online as we did in the room. And so we were really pleased to get them engaged. Sorry, Madeline, please come in.
No, I want to go. I was just going to add, what was interesting is that we used the cases as a prompt, as an input into that discussion, but everyone then was just bringing their own experience, their own learning from their own whole range of programs and policy areas that they'd worked in. So it was a way of stimulating, but then collating a much broader range of examples to be able to feed into this process.
Yeah, and there was definitely a breadth achieved, but a lot of commonalities that helped validate basically some of the outputs that we'll share in a moment. And one of the things I think I say in the video we're about to share as well was how many of them were human stories about that practice of really trying to talk to people, bring people on board, and get them connected to these shared initiatives, because these are complex challenges that require collaboration, and it was a human story as much as technical stories that they were trying to share. So sorry, next slide there.
Apologies, I just had a small flurry of changing to there, but
it's all right. These are nice visual slides. Everyone wants to see them again. And so this is just an insight in terms of what we did with these contributions. It was essentially a thematic analysis of clustering to see, okay, what insight is this giving to us about system level change and the practices to help achieve that, and obviously towards innovation policies as well. So this is a little preview of the structure, the canvas, principles canvas that we'll present after the video. But it just shows you some of our working, some of the thinking, validating it as a team with the EPRC group. It took a couple of weeks, iterations to make sure, are these accurate? Are these valid? Using the case studies as well to validate them. But this was just an insight that we were able to remotely work and bring some quite meaningful narratives and principles out from that input. So lots to contend with. Okay, next slide. And that principles canvas that we'll share in a moment, the learning was the format of the learnings. So on the table there, you'll see we got people to respond to that. It was an all-day session, so we really got to spend time with, are these meaningful, are these valid insights to respond to, sharing, okay, what do they mean in practice? So people were kind of responding to them almost with short projects or forms of collaboration, or what does good practice mean for us going forward? Actually, the innovation panel also came on this session to respond to the learnings and the findings as well. And it was all a process to help validate, to help connect, how can we make this useful? So hopefully the way we've done that is useful. But I think sharing the whole process is as useful as sharing these final outputs as well. So what we'll do next is share the video, because we feel this will actually tell some of the story in the participants' voice as well. So there might be a bit of repetition, obviously, with the storytelling, but we really wanted you to hear from the participants' perspective what they got and how they engaged with the sessions. So I'm going to share screen this time. And do enjoy. It's about 7 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with those outputs.
Innovation policies for system transformation are really important because of the challenges we're facing. And we have really important challenges related to climate change in particular, and the environmental sustainability transition, also related to issues such as ageing, demography, immigration flows, etc. These are big challenges that need innovative solutions, and so we need innovation policy that can push innovation in a certain direction.
Innovation policies have been traditionally for new products and processes, and now innovation policies for transformation is transforming systems to address societal challenges.
The issue is not just fixing one small thing, but it's about transforming society in the way we live together and the technologies.
Sometimes there's very far between politics, industry and academia.
We have been looking at innovation policy, but not innovation policy for small-scale improvement, looking at innovation policy for system transformation. How can we change things quite radically at a regional territory level?
This project is funded by Scottish University's Insights Institute. We've designed 3 workshops and we've produced a sort of framework to help us tell stories about transformation policies and innovation policies. At the design stage, what is it you're trying to do with policy change? The mobilisation stage, how you mobilise the key stakeholders and actors, make them care about the change you're trying to implement. The delivery, how that then takes effect on the ground and how that can be done effectively. And then the evidencing, how well not only is it taking hold, but is it making the difference you want it to make? How do you evidence that? And so we've tried to collaborate with EPRC with their insights, bringing in people across Europe who also share some of those challenges, also want to achieve some of those types of goals.
The European Policies Research Centre has tried to bring a perspective of regional development. We also frequently work with local stakeholders or regional stakeholders across Europe and analyse their policies or their initiatives. And so we brought that expertise to this project, and it's been great working with the Glasgow School of Art. They not just have a creative approach to these types of workshops and work with different stakeholders, but to us, they also bring another perspective on how we can do this work.
I think it's important across Europe to understand the economic development challenges that different places are facing, and it's increasingly important to learn from the experiences across Europe.
The way that the systems we work at the moment are fundamentally broken, I think.
It's a very long-term thing that you're trying to do, but everything is short-term. Short-term funding, short-term projects, short-term, which makes it very, very difficult then to create what is that long-term vision. But if you can connect things together in a more system perspective, then those short-term projects can all then show how they can link to that long-term goal.
It's incredibly important that we're able to really look at how we can use innovation in particular and use that to really drive the collaborative opportunities between public sector, private sector and academia, and do that in a way that really supports a strong and combined strength approach that really drives the Scottish economy, creating new businesses, creating new opportunities and driving a great value of market share, and looking to really push Scotland on an international level as well, and really beginning to demonstrate Scotland as an international leader in innovation.
And in order to have that systems change and systems transformation, you need to work with partners and you need to work with everybody across the system. You need to make sure that everybody in the system feels empowered, like they can help contribute to the change that you want to see. We're focused on what we do in our everyday, and for system transformation it requires us to lift our heads above what we're doing currently and relate our part of the puzzle to the bigger picture, and to be able to take the time out to zoom out from our current systems and to see how what we're doing relates to what someone else is doing.
From a public funder's perspective, I think change requires time and it requires funding. And so public funding, having that ability to have the confidence and ability to continually fund or have that vision to commit to that funding is very challenging, especially in the economic environment that we find ourselves in today.
Evidencing the impact is very difficult. I think when you look at kind of transformational change, then really what you have to do is you have to demonstrate that evidence. You know, so that we heard a lot about evidence and the links to policy. I think that's really important. And then the ability to share good practice.
You also have to have the courage to review and maybe also say this isn't working and we maybe need to realign and go in a different direction. And again, from a public sector point of view, that sometimes can be challenging.
You're always looking for different ways, better ways to do stuff. And generally, if you can do that failure and trial earlier on, that's a good thing. If you've got that mindset, a culture that appreciates that, and it's seen as a process that should be embedded in any organisation, but not all organisations are like that.
Everybody's involved in the solution in some sense, so they need to work together to find that solution, and they need to innovate together in a sense.
Working on innovation is also something that can showcase how important collaboration is and showcases how different we are, but also how similar we are.
One of the things that I spoke about was not working just within the confines of my sector, which is health and care, but looking at what I can learn from other sectors and how I might connect with other sectors to create innovation within my own sector.
I think policies for system transformation are really important to explore in this kind of forum, because you've got different voices and different people from different sectors that can bring their knowledge and their expertise, and we can all learn from each other.
Whether it be innovation policy or another kind of policy, another kind of project, sometimes we are very stuck in a way of working and talking to the same people. And so I think it's very important for us to kind of get out of the box and discuss with different stakeholders, people from different backgrounds that have different challenges and that have another perspective on a particular challenge that sometimes we all face.
What surprised me by going through the workshops was how much there were human stories from people working in teams, talking about relationships, how you build relationships and trust. I think there was a lot of the soft, more social sort of capital, if you want, that emerges very important as part of how you do things well.
I think there's an awful lot of people that have been working this in isolation, and it's really hard to do. Hopefully, even across Scotland and now internationally, we've started to bring together other people who are also saying, actually, I'm working on that challenge as well, and maybe we can learn together.
Cool. I'll stop share there. Madeline, do you want to reshare slides from your end, or? Yeah, hopefully then you saw the authentic voice from the participants, which is really good to hear. And some of what they're saying come up in the principles that we basically communicate, these intangible factors of system level transformation and innovation policies made more tangible by what we've tried to produce out. Madeline, if you want to add anything else there?
No, I think it was really, I think one of the key things was the different perspectives that people were bringing that enabled us to generate something that was much more powerful than if we'd been working in silos.
Yeah. So this is one of the main outputs that came, and we, as I say, we used and presented a first version in the third workshop, and then tested it, validated, enhanced the language and some of the prompts to support it. So it's effectively a tool called a principles canvas, and it just tries to reflect the different areas of the system that good practices can maybe be made more tangible, and some prompts about what can support towards good practices. So it's not exhaustive. It's very much just reflecting the conversations and the wisdom that got shared in the room. But we felt it was a worthy, tangible thing to share in this visual way. So in this structure, you've got understanding the context. So we might zoom in actually now, Madeline, on each section. So you get a taster of what the principles say. So the top left was understanding the context. So if you're engaging in a sector or around a mission, do you have the right understanding in place, or how do you go about developing that understanding? So the key challenges, the opportunities and the levers within that system. Do you have a good sense of that? And if not, who do you need to engage with to help you get that sense? But also being sure to know what is already out there and how you build on it. So you're not starting from scratch, but it's very much a collaboration with those already engaged in that sector. And that are always in these contexts, stakeholders or projects or people involved in this challenge that you're trying to address. I won't sort of list through every single one, but it's just giving you a flavour of what that came out in each area. With the next one, the development structures. So once you do understand that context, what are you putting in place to help improve collaborations, to get the right sort of projects going, to get the right sort of initiatives going? So that idea that was mentioned in the video of short-term funding and the challenges that has for long-term change, how can you address that? So how do you provide space for innovation and risk-taking as part of those funding or development support structures? Investment in robust multi-stakeholder network facilitation. I think in the cluster model, more and more you have cluster facilitators, these nodes that help connect up people about the bigger picture, that help the zoom out. We're seen as really crucial and needed really good social capital skills, as was mentioned, to help build those relationships, get people on the same page, get people collaborating. And one maybe to highlight is also clear methodologies at the bottom right for diverse monitoring and evaluation from the start. These are complex contexts, and so you need to really maximize the learning and how you putting in the structure so that everyone shares in that learning, which will be highlighted actually later on as a key part of the canvas as well. Next slide. One of the most important areas was about cultivating partnerships, the people you need involved and how you involve them. So cultivating existing partnerships and leaders and individuals as change drivers. It's not all on the policymakers or the public sector. There are already people in that space that you can build really strong relationships with who can have really good effect and influence in that context. So that's seen as a really important strategic way to engage with that. But also then that ensuring transparent, clear and bespoke communication engagement. Once you're starting on a process, how are you building that trust? How are you making sure they understand what's happening at the different stages? There can be that first good conversation, but if you don't follow that up, or if you're not clear about what's happening as you move forward, then you can lose those relationships. And there's other factors around relationship building that come through within this principal canvas as well. Leadership, absolutely crucial as well. The idea, not just having a long-term vision and mission, but that everyone understands their roles within it. That is the role of leadership, to really be able to communicate that, and through understanding the context and cultivating those partnerships, knowing how to bring people along in that. So they really take responsibility. That's key stages or key areas to reflect and represent what the innovation policies are doing and to what extent it's achieving system level transformation. So one of the ways is they need to be flexible to learn what is needed. So they cannot just say, I know what the solution is and I'm going to drive it. They really need to learn with and show leadership that learning with others is part of that process. And that leads us nicely to the center, and we deliberately put it in the center because it interconnected with every single other part of that canvas. How do you promote learning across the system? So establishing what good evidence is and why it matters is a really important part of that, and it will help, really key tool to help leaders in that communication if they can know what the evidence is and how to capture it. But there needs to be established methods and experimental methods that best reflect that evidence, because you can sometimes, with the wrong methods, you're pointing at the wrong sort of metrics or you're pointing at the wrong sort of evidence. So it's really being open to learn and develop in these innovation policies, innovative ways to understand that. Often very reflective methods or qualitative methods are an important part of that picture, particularly in the case of health and well-being or the case of net zero and sustainable development. There's other measures that everyone needs to get familiar with as part of that story. And storytelling is one I did want to emphasize here as well. How do you communicate that evidence? Actually, storytelling as part of the leadership skills was one of the things that really felt like you could access what system level change meant across multiple stakeholders. There's often various expertise with various sort of disciplinary backgrounds or ways of speaking. Storytelling, therefore, is one of the big connectors, and connecting that to evidence and to reflect meaningfully across the stakeholders was a really key value people were sharing in the room. So there's all these outputs are openly accessible. We have the report telling the story of the process that basically we've just told there. We've got the case studies themselves, really interesting across different sectors and contexts. And we have that principles canvas that hopefully we've made you very interested in, and we're really keen for you to engage with it, use it. I guess one of the key points about why we designed it this way, it was reflected by partners in the room. It's just a very good checklist. Some of them feel almost common sense, but altogether, they actually are a body of wisdom. And maybe there's different ways to engage and use it. And they're a really good access point for those not traditionally involved in innovation policy or policy development. They really do demystify some of the factors around it. I know I didn't have much experience in policy development, and I found this process really helped me understand the challenges and processes involved. So in terms of communication for others, getting them on board, it can be a really good tool for that too. So we're really keen to hear back from you, how this makes sense, how you might use it. Sorry, Madeline, you can finish off on what other next steps.
Yeah, no, I would say we're sharing our learning at the moment and just trying to test it with other people, see if other people think it makes sense. But we were pretty we got some robust testing during the workshop process, so we're keen to share that learning. We're obviously doing this today. We've been engaged with the TCI Global Conference, where some of this was shared. The principal canvas was shared. The global TCI is, for those that don't know, are the Global Cluster and Collaborative Innovation Network. So they recently held their conference in Chihuahua, and one of our partners was reporting on how could clusters be a tool for actually moving towards those system transformation, even though they started off their lives as very much economic development. But we could shift, we could repurpose a cluster as a collaborative innovation for system transformation. So we've done that. Later this week, we're at the Regional Studies Association, also just talking about the program and the learning that we've had. So we're keen to share our outputs and our principles with others. And one of the things that we did in the final session was also get our participants to think about collaborations they wanted to take forward. And some of those are already bearing fruit, but we're particularly around continuing this network around everyone's working on this in isolation. Can we work together? And also the challenge of system level evaluation being two key ones that are already moving forward. But we're keen to collaborate with others who might want to test it in a different way or use the principles canvas and the outputs. So keen to hear about options for collaboration. I think I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass back to Ruth.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madeline and Michael, for a really interesting presentation of both the process and the outcomes from those 3 workshops. So we have about 15 minutes for discussion or questions. So can I open up to the floor to anybody who would like to either ask Michael or Madeline or the project team about any aspect of that process, or also share from your own experience if you're involved with innovation strategies or system transformation, how would you reflect on what's been presented or from your own experience in this area? So happy to take any questions or comments that people would have. Alan Whiteside, can I bring you in there first of all, and then Charlie? Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for a very interesting presentation, Michael and Madeline. Without picking on sort of specific sectors or specific partners, how do you ensure in a group like that you don't have include bias without having say the people who identify the barriers in the system transformation there, in terms of representing maybe, for example, more diversity in the public sector rather than just government, or more business who are delivering there in order to say, sorry, my waist back, the dog just reacted, to kind of make sure that these things deal with what you wanted in terms of having better cohesion between the triple helix partners that you want to bring together?
Yeah, no, it's always a challenge, isn't it? You're trying to bring people together to talk about a particular area, and so it tends to be those who are interested in that particular area that get involved. So how do you make sure you're hearing the unheard voices? I think that's partly the reason that we tried to design the workshops in the way they were, to try and bring together different. So it wasn't just Scottish Government. We had local authority and other partners. We had a whole range of intermediaries rather than private sector, but certainly representations of business communities within the workshops as well, to try and get all sorts of different voices coming into it. We also had some who were working in the charity sector, to not from charities themselves, but were working in programs involving the charitable sector, to be able to get that voice in as well. I totally agree. It's important to not get just one kind of voice, else you're only going to get one kind of answer and one kind of policy, and that's what we tried to do. But always interested to hear how we can engage more broadly. I think that's something that myself and Michael work with a lot, to try and say, how can you broaden the engagement in innovation rather than it being seen as a very narrow group of people who are allowed to talk about it. So we tried our best, Alan, but you know, always keen to hear more.
Yeah, and I think what was good was the diversity of the people we brought together. There were some projects that were much more explicitly, that was a consideration, a concern within their context compared to others. And actually in the innovation panel, there were some good questions on that very topic as well, about who gets excluded in these processes and how do you adapt for that. So some of the principles point towards that, but as I say, these are conversational principles rather than signposting towards really deep processes. So I imagine that's part of our interest at the next stage, is how can you back this up with more of a library of knowledge than a sort of canvas of wisdom, so to speak.
I think it's also worth saying something that gives me comfort, although maybe not in the actual workshops, is that everyone didn't agree. There was quite a lot of conflicting perspectives and some quite vigorous debates as part of the workshop, which is a good thing, I think. But that showed that we had brought different voices together. We weren't just everyone agreeing and saying, well, yeah, we'll continue to it like this. There was real conflict in some ways, in a nice way, and out of conflict, better innovation comes, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I would still recommend that the storytelling frameworks, they're being asked of everyone, so everyone is being given a way to tell that story too. So I think that does help bridge that. But go on.
Sorry, Michael, I was going to say, and a final bit is that we weren't just looking for we're fab and this is what we did examples. We were getting people to bring out this didn't really work very well because we did it like this and it didn't work, so I wouldn't do that again, and trying to capture that learning, because I think that's important as well. Anyway, we've answered you about 4 times and other people have got their hand up.
Great, thanks very much. Charlie, can I bring you in now, and then Heather?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ruth. Yeah, very good to see how the project has developed and been sort of finalised at this stage, and how it's being taken forward. So that's great. Just as listening again to the outputs from it, I've just been reading recently John Kay's book about the corporation in the 21st century, and one of the things that he really emphasises is that a successful corporation is a corporation that develops a culture which allows a collective intelligence to be developed and then applied, and that the nature of that culture is very much relational, and actually often spreads outside of the corporation itself as well. And I was just struck by that sort of notion of collective intelligence, and the culture behind it was very much part and parcel of what I heard coming about from this work as well. So it's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Charlie. Yes, that's a very very important point. Heather, could I bring you in?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for sharing all of that work and learning. It's really interesting, and I think, as you said, although much of it is on the surface common sense, until it's written down, people don't really necessarily kind of have the tools to communicate about it. I was wondering, from a kind of a nuts and bolts practical perspective, all of the things that I can see on the canvas look, very sensible, but I don't see the kind of, for example, you have workshops, people talk very collaboratively, and then when you get to the actual implementation, when you've got multiple organizations, as soon as you start talking contractual obligations and collaboration agreements and things like that, the collaboration feel tends to dissipate a little bit. I wonder if you touched on that at all within your workshops. Thank you.
We absolutely did. So there was a and I think it was quite interesting is that we had, as well as cultivating partnerships, which was a very important bit, and that wasn't surprising. There was also about the development structures. So there was something about, you need something in place to help this happen, because else it's just people have good intentions, but the day job gets in the way, quite frankly, and the institutional barriers get in the way. So if you can also invest in that softish structure to actually help that, then those two, so they're not in isolation, the development structure and the cultivating partnerships, I think work together on that. I think the other thing, so I'm talking you around now as well, because the other thing is the leadership bit, which is if you have a common vision and you are communicating that, is that we can't do this on our own. If we all work together, we can achieve this. So doing together what you can't do on your own is a very, I can help ease your pain. I know you're struggling with this. if you work with me, I've got this problem as well, and we can both find a solution. So I think that leadership element really, really builds to that as well. So I think that what we tried to show was that it's not in isolation, and we need to make collaboration supported and not transactional. And if you are collaborating for the purpose and you are supporting it in that collaboration, and just because I want to point to the other one as well, you've drawn in what's already there. You're not starting from scratch every single time, which we have a tendency to do, but you're actually saying, oh, actually, we invested in this 10 years ago, and look, it's doing that already. Can we draw it into our collaboration and build on it, rather than setting up something separate? So trying to bring all the parts together, I think, was what we were looking at. But totally agree, we need to make sure collaboration is linked to all of those and not transactional.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I would hope to sort of, and would be eager to sort of support in some way at next stages, is, does the Principles Canvas help anyone within the system, both leadership and stakeholders and wider, make that case? Can they use that to build the argument? So not just the business case, but the model of practice that say, well, if we want to achieve this, we need to invest in this part, and this Principles Canvas says so, would be a great line, but more just to say, altogether, it can help build those cases, help maybe approach those conversations or those moments in system level transformation. Because it's open access, anyone can access them. So if they're wanting to influence change, I'm hopeful and interested to see, can this help that conversation? Can that help that planning and relationship building? I'm not saying it will happen every time, but it's a tool that I think can move people in that direction.
And from a Scotland point of view, what was interesting and useful was the fact that we had Scottish Government participation involved in the innovation policy. We had Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands, but particularly Scottish Enterprise, who were tasked with now trying to shape the cluster policies. We had innovation centres who are probably going to be part of that, and Scottish Funding Council, who recently invested in the next stage for innovation centres of those long-term innovation infrastructure. So we had the right people in the room, but at an early enough stage. So hopefully, and the feedback and the conversations we've continued to have with them is that that was useful for them at their stage of development about what do we do next. So I'm hopeful that we will see some of that actually, that's part of the outputs.
Great, thanks very much. There's also a question that's come in via the chat, which is about the role of local authorities. Was that included as part of the discussion, their role and the challenges or possibilities that come in via local authorities, who are obviously a really important player in system level development and transformation, both in terms of contributing to the conversation, but also implementing a lot of it. So any comment on the role of local authorities?
I'll let Michael come in, but absolutely is that they are part of that landscape that we need to build on and need to involve. And we had Glasgow City Council as one of the case studies, taking forward one of the stuff that they've been doing around connecting nature, but also then bringing the broader perspective and frustration at a local authority level about how you can play your part and still be linking into national policies, as well as trying to implement at a very local level. So acting as that bit in between. Michael, you've been involved with Glasgow City Council in some of their work.
Yeah, and Connecting Nature is actually a network across local authorities as well, that was sharing and addressing those challenges and developing good practices themselves. But I think one of that challenge of the short-term development structures and long-term vision, local authorities are actually seen as strategically an important part, because they're going to be a long-term stakeholder. They will always have responsibility for places. So actually their resonance as a part of that system level change is amplified because they hold that role. Therefore, then having the capacity to be able to be part of that development structure, be part of those relationships, was just seen as a really clear advantage for them. And as I say, hopefully builds the case that going forward, those funding structures or the role they play, they can be included much more. And I think cluster development recognises that. as well. You're seeing university partnerships in local contexts being much more enhanced in that respect as well. So yes, in a word, Helen, and hopefully that gave you insight on how it came up in the sessions.
Great, thanks very much. Well, we're nearly out of time, so can I just check whether anybody else has a last question or comment before I hand over to Madeline and Michael if they have any last comments? So I don't see any hands raised. So can I hand back just for a couple of last reflections, and then I'll wrap up.
It's been great to have Alan's got his hand up.
Alan, do you want to come in again?
Sorry, just I couldn't find the hand up button, sorry. Just a little more practical question, Madeline and Michael. You said about wanting people to use the canvas. What's the best way to do that? Is it to do you want to be involved in that process, or do you want it to kind of grow organically, that kind of people use it and feed back to you?
So I was just about to say, you've got access to it if you follow on the SUI website, but we'd love to know what you're doing with it, and we'd love to know how it's working. So I was going to say, if you want to explore the outputs that we've got, start to use the principles canvas, and we'd love to be involved, but we don't have to be. So just keep in touch about how you're doing it. But if we can get involved and be supportive, then we'd love to do that as well. Because the way we've set it is that from feedback really from that final session is, as well as the individual principles and the underlying subparts of it, we changed just the notations really to be a series of questions to actually try and prompt a response, rather than it being a whole range of descriptions. So hopefully that is making it a more useful toolkit for people to use, to actually test and challenge themselves with these prompt questions to say, are we actually doing that? Are we thinking about these elements? So we'd love to hear from you if you are looking at it, thinking about using it, and continue that conversation.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and if there's any questions about it to help with that process, then yeah, we're willing to support that, making sense of it as well. I know I'm using it in student projects and in a couple of projects of my own, just as a provocation, a tool at certain stages. Do we want to reflect and look at this, zoom out altogether, because it makes very important principles tangible, essentially. So I think that's why and when you would use it, when you feel that making that tangible with others is important to do. Okay. Oh, you're muted, Ruth.
Sorry, thank you very much. Thank you very much for Michael and Madeline for a very interesting presentation of what was a very interesting process. And as you'll see, there was Michael's put up the link in the chat there, but we can also include it in the email that goes out to you all afterwards, which will have a link to the recording of the presentation as well. So in the spirit of disseminating it as widely as possible so that the toolkit can be used as widely as possible, please feel free to do that, and that would be great. So just a last point, our final webinar for EPRC for the autumn semester is on the 11th of December. And that will be Miriam de Oliveira Gonçalves from Urban Lab, looking at urbanism and territorial dynamics, examining local action groups as territorial development policies, focusing on the CLLD in the Lisbon metropolitan area. So if you're interested in that, there'll be more information coming through on that in the coming weeks, but on the 11th of December, and we would be delighted to see you there. I see Miriam's on the call, so we look forward to that seminar. So again, many thanks to everybody for participating and listening this morning. It's been great to disseminate the program and the outputs to a wider audience, and we hope that rollout process will continue. So thank you again to Madeline and Michael. Thank you to yourselves, and I wish you a very good rest of the day.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.